After the list function, let us now look at another very useful function in Excel called the offset function. The offset function gives you the value of a cell that is at a certain number of rows and columns from a given reference cell. In other words, it helps to find the value few rows and columns from a certain reference cell. This is again very useful to create dynamic models in Excel. In order to see how this works, let us look at an illustration to demonstrate the offset function. You may again want to go back to the Excel that was provided along with this course. If you go back to the Excel that was provided along with this course and go to the offset tab, it will lay out the exercise associated with this function in Excel. This is again the same scenario that we saw for the list function as well. For the scenario that the user has chosen, we would now like to select the particular oil price corresponding to that scenario. If you remember, in the list function, we had given the user a choice to select any of the 4 scenarios between 1, 2, 3 and 4. And depending upon the choice that the user has made, we would now like this cell to show us the price of the crude that we are projecting in the future. In other words, if the user chooses 2, we would ask the user, or we would write a formula here such that Excel gives us the value $60 corresponding to the scenario 2 that the user has chosen. In this way, as you can see, depending upon whatever choice the user makes, the corresponding crude price will appear using an Excel function with offset. Let us see how we use that functionality to illustrate this example. To use that functionality, we simply write equal to offset and open the brackets. The moment we write offset and open the bracket, Excel asks us for a reference cell in this particular exercise. For now, let's say the reference cell is cell D4. We choose D4 for a particular reason, as we will illustrate in some time. And we press comma after choosing D4. Now Excel asks us a particular format for rows. What Excel means to say here is that using the reference cell as D4, to find the value that we want to get for the crude price, how many rows up or down do we have to move? Now, one thing is very clear, that in order to choose scenario 2, we would have to move down 2 rows from cell D4 to come to value 60, because my scenario 2 is exactly 2 rows down my cell D4, and hence in the rows tab or in the rows value, I will link it to cell B11 of the Excel sheet. In this way, whatever choice the user chooses in the scenario, that many corresponding rows will Excel move from the reference row D4. And I again press a comma. Now Excel asks us for columns. Excel is just like the rows. Excel is now asking us how many columns left or right do we need to move. Notice, because we chose column D, which again has the value of the crude price that we want to choose, we don't want Excel to move anywhere on the left or on the right, but stay put on column D itself. Hence, we will choose the value 0, telling Excel that it should move neither columns to the right nor columns to the left, and hence it should stay put on column D with D4 as the reference cell. And I close the open bracket. Let me repeat the formula once again for you. We wrote the formula equal to offset with the reference cell D4. Why we chose D4 should be clear now. With the cell reference as D4, my column remains where the value of crude is, and choosing 4 allows me to move down as many rows as the scenario option that I have chosen. Hence, we choose the reference cell as D4, press a comma, ask Excel to move down rows of B11, which is the scenario that the user has chosen. So Excel will ask the function to move down 2 rows in this case from cell D4, and 0 says don't move any column left or right, and hence it will stay put on column D. If I now press an enter after closing the bracket, notice that the moment I choose scenario 2, the cell returns to me value $60. In this way, Excel allows us using the offset function to choose a particular value corresponding to the scenario that we may have chosen. You may now wonder, what if I had chosen a different reference cell? Well, that's something you can experiment as well. There is no obligation for us to select D4 as the only reference cell in this exercise. Let us write another formula here that will give us the same value depending upon a different reference cell that we may choose to select. To do that, I write another formula here to the right of the current formula and just ensure we have the same values in both the cases. To show you a different reference cell, I again write equal to offset and open the brackets. It asks me for a reference row or a reference cell. I choose B4 this time instead of D4 as the reference cell. The moment I choose B4 as the reference cell, the automatic implication will be that the columns will change as well for me, as we will see in some time. So I press a comma and Excel asks me for how many rows down should I move from the cell B4. Again, notice that to come to scenario 2, we would have to move down to 2 rows below B4, and hence again we choose B11 as the number of rows that Excel should move down from B4. Comma, it now asks me the more important question, how many columns to the right should we move? Notice that from column B to column D, we have to move 2 columns to the right, and hence we will choose the columns as 2 in this formula and close the bracket. The moment we choose 2, now offset function will tell Excel to move down 2 rows below and 2 columns to the right from the reference cell B4. And if we press enter, let's see the value we get. The value we get is exactly the same as the one we had written using the cell D4 as a reference. Notice how that the moment I change the reference cell, both the values change correspondingly according to the scenario value of that particular scenario. So if I choose scenario 4, it automatically gives me $50 in both the cells using the same offset function. The only difference between these two is that we have a different reference cell from the choice that we have given to the formula. Thus, given any particular cell, if we want to move Excel to a particular row and column from that reference cell, the offset function can be very handy to illustrate that. We strongly recommend you that you try out using the formula with different reference cell such that you have to change the rows and columns dynamically depending upon the reference cell that you may have chosen. Feel free to reach out to us to cross-check and validate the formula that you may have written.